Take it away, Matt, thank you.
Yeah, ambient piece. I don't know. It's what I do. Got some new toys, played around with them. Yeah, that's kind of it for the song. Any questions? Yeah, haunting is definitely the vibe I'm going for. As long as I can stretch things out and play things as long as possible. Which, in a way, relates to the talk I'm about to give you. So let's just go straight into that. For those that don't know who I am, I'm Matthew Martinson. I make music under the name Mattesque. I, as a job, make sounds for video games, which is a pretty awesome job. This talk is very off the cuff, so feel free to ask any questions as I progress through this. So one of the things when I make music, I generally make ambient music, which is all about like how long can I make things, how long can I stay within a minimalist chord set and not change stuff. And part of the reason for that is at my day job, I make sounds that have to be very impactful in less than half a second. I have to transmit information to a player that what has happened in this like a quarter of a second. So my day job, I'm very information dense sound design. So when I go home and I get to play with this stuff, let's stretch it out into 10 minutes. Let's see if we can go even longer than that. I am lucky to occasionally use my modular synths in game audio. One of the really great things when we're designing sounds for games, the difference between designing sounds for games versus designing sounds for movies, TV shows. When a film plays and the guy, punches the enemy, that happens once and it's gone and it never has to happen again. So the sound designer gets to design the perfect punch for that moment, and it is glorious. As a game person, we're like, the player can punch that guy, and he can punch him 5 times in a row, or once, or 20 times, or he can punch another guy, and then the other guy, and then the other person. So I need to make punches that cover 20 different punch actions that can happen all at any given time. I don't know when they're going to happen. So we deal with this whole concept of like massive amounts of variety. Modular can come in as a sound creation source, which can be really great for that because we have all these modulation sources, so we can make tons of variety of stuff by like patching all our stuff together and designing like, hey, now I have this vast variety of sounds very quickly. So that's one of the cool things about using modular synths in my day job. Any questions with what I've just spoken about?
Well, I imagine if it gives you so much freedom, it can also mean that it's like kind of like Jacques Derrida's saying that you can make any word, but deconstruct it, and you can find that it actually doesn't mean anything. So
yes.
That sort of thing, like you could just have so much freedom that, like, how do you specify? I guess is the question.
Yeah, the too much is definitely a thing that can happen. I was talking to one of my coworkers, industry friends, can't remember who, but they were like, yeah, I find modular stuff too much to do as a day job. Within the confines of how quickly we have to work and stuff. So they like shy away from that. And there is negatives to it as well. But I remember there's a video from one of the designers from one of the last Halo games. He was showing off his big modular setup in his studio, and he just like sets up a patch that like does stuff, modulating away, and then records an hour of it. And he walks away. He won't even listen to it. And then comes back and goes through and like, oh, that's a cool bit. Pull that out, tag it, and just like, then you listen, you pull out the good bits and you add them to your library and stuff. So it can be a great way to like create this massive bed of source, and then you edit it. When you're searching for a specific thing, yes, it is easy to get lost in the coolness of all of what's going on here and be like, I lost it. I don't even know what I'm making anymore. It works well for some things and not well for others. So if you've done enough of it to know what it's going to be beneficial for, that's great. when you're starting out and just exploring everything, it can be a bit much. It definitely, modular synths and synths in general, aim towards the sci-fi set of things. So when you're making a cozy fantasy game, maybe I'm not going to get so much work out of it. I work at a studio called Clay Entertainment. We're most famous for Don't Starve is our really big game. That is a world where synths don't exist. And when I started that game, I was like, no synths in the sounds, because that's not what fits. So for many years, couldn't use any of this stuff when I was making sounds for that game. But then I moved on to a very sci-fi spaceship game, and I was like, yeah, I finally get to use all the toys. I was super excited because it fit the aesthetic. So when we're doing spaceships and lasers and like that kind of stuff, it was like, cool, this is exactly the realm of this. There's been a lot of really great sample libraries created aimed at anime sounds, which definitely leads sci-fi. And people have used exclusively modular synths to make all those 70s and 80s anime sounds that, like, you know when you know them. They've been able to recreate them with all of this stuff, which is tons of fun to like hear them and then try to like figure out what's going on there. Is there one here?
Well, you kind of answered my question because I've been meaning to ask a lot. But you talked about some of the video games you kind of worked on. What are you most proud of in that realm?
Probably Don't Starve, Mark of the Ninja. Those are my biggest ones, both of which don't feature modular synths in them at all, unfortunately.
No, but
What
the
sounds
strings in Don't
specific?
Starve. The strings in Don't Starve are great.
I didn't compose the music. The composers on Don't Starve are amazing. That's one of the things. I stick to strictly sound design. When I make music that I'm incredibly proud of and I'm happy with. And then if I give it to somebody, they're like, "Can you change this part?" I'd be like, "No, I cannot." I can take sound design direction. I can't take musical direction. So I don't compose for video games because it's a collaborative process. Your whole team, you've got a bunch of people with ideas, and you have to listen to everybody. And so when somebody's like, "Hey, I really love this part of the music, but not that," I'm like, I don't know what to do with that. Hire a different composer. So I stick to that kind of part of it. The creature sounds in Don't Starve is one of the things I'm most proud of. The vast majority of those use my mouth to make the sounds, which is recordings of myself, and then I process them. Which this rack was originally intended as a processing rack that I could take to work and like record stuff out of my DAW that I was creating. And I've got a Nebula, which is a sampler, and I can load up samples on it, and then I've got a bunch of effects that I can then run through it. So if I wanted to sort of at work get out of the box and get hands-on, I've got this rig that I can like small enough to carry, and it's filled with processing elements to just be like, cool, now I can screw around with sounds and then spit it back into my computer for stuff. You got a question?
So you said you don't always use modular for your game sound design.
Yeah.
What are the other tools?
Mostly recording real-world sounds.
Okay.
I'm manipulating them in the DAW.
Is that in your music eventually sometimes?
Sometimes I've done field recordings within my musical elements as well. At times, one of the drawbacks to modular within a production environment for sounds is the total lack of recall. And if you do want recall, you have to take copious notes. You have to design sheets to write everything down, and it's a giant pain in the ass. Because a lot of times we make a sound and then we have to revise it, and we have to revise it again. We might revise it. We have jokes about like, creature sound _ final. You're like. So most often when I'm using modular in my sound design for games, I do kind of what the Halo guy does of like record a bunch of source that I then will manipulate further in various ways in the DAW with plugins and stuff. There is quite a few soft modular synths. There's VCV Rack, Cherry Audio has one, Softtube has one. Those can be great because it gives you a bit of the modular feel within the box that I can save as a preset and come back to and revisit again, which is a midway point, So lots of real world sounds, because if a game is like Don't Starve, that was the reason there was no synths there. That world exists, and it has a logic and a being to it, and it's magical, but it's not sci-fi. So in my head, fantasy is real world sounds and not computers. But once you're like, hey, I'm working on a spaceship game, like all bets are off. Well, now we've got computers making sounds. Cool. So stuff with that aesthetic of like Alien is awesome to get to use modular stuff on, because that's that like all analog feeling computers and like cathode ray tubes and stuff. So like you get to lean into that kind of stuff in that area. So yeah, it's fun. It's fun that as a day job I get to use this stuff, and not just screwing around at home. Somebody pays me to play with this. It's pretty awesome. Anything else?
Question for you. So, alien sounds.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to get some kind of direction on what these aliens maybe look like, or something about it, some kind of context on them. But in the whole realm of sound, how do you decide what these aliens sound like with their weapons or technology or personal sound, whatever?
You start to pick apart why and how they exist in my brain. So and so that comes from concept art, or art in the game. That comes from talking to your narrator, like the narration writer, and like, well, what's the backstory of this species? Are they wearing spaceships or helmets, spacesuits? Like, can they breathe the air that the humans breathe? Like, are they communicating in a direct language, that's foreign to the stuff? Or do they, can't breathe oxygen, so they always wear spacesuits? Okay, well, whatever sound I do, I have to have muffled, either coming through a speaker or through glass or whatever. So, okay, that's a processing element. I'm gonna make sure that it sounds right. Like, how do I place it? Do they, how is it that, like, you try to think of how does their body work? And is it big? Is it little? So do you want a deep, heavy resonant thing? Do you want it to be small? Do you want to play against type and go, this huge character, it's actually kind of supposed to be funny, so I'm going to give him a little voice, like, that goes against that. So there's intentional rules you will break that you would think are normal. And then a lot of times, like I'll use my voice as a starting point for weird creatures, and I just look at the pictures, or watch the animation, and start making sounds with my mouth, and see if anything feels right. And if it does, I'll start recording things and go that way. If it doesn't, well, what animal has the characteristics that I want to, like, think that this should impart? And if I get a good idea, then also, is there a sample library big enough for me to pull from for that? And there's lots of techniques for recording your voice that, which I can use with the Nebula, actually. Like, Nebula is great because it allows you to disconnect speed and pitch from each other. So often you'll be like, well, I have this creature, it's kind of going to sound like a walrus, but I want more humanity to it, so I will take a walrus sample, pitch it down, very speed it down 2 octaves. It sounds really low and it's really slow. I'll record my voice copying that, and then I can put it in Nebula and like turn the pitch up while it's slow, turn the speed up while the pitch is down, and start manipulate against those two things against each other to be like, well, where does this now fit? There was a really cool trick. Guys down in Seattle, Sucker Punch, who did Ghost of Tsushima, they needed more birds. There wasn't enough bird recordings for the stuff, so they found when you record, slow birds down an octave or 2, record the human voice copying that, and then take the human voice and pitch it back up to where the birds are, you sound like a bird. So they were able to like increase their variety by these human birds. And I've used that technique many times on other creatures to like do the same thing, like copy something you perform it really low, knowing you're going to speed it up and pitch it up. So now it's this thing, but it sounds different than that because of the manipulation of everything. And then one of the modules I've got in here for these kind of reasons too is the format shifter, which format shifting works differently than pitch shifting, and it can be great when you want to just take something and take off the human edge to it. You shift the formats a little bit and it's like, oh, it doesn't really sound like a person anymore. Like some of these are just little subtle techniques to carve off the human edge, but still keep the emotional heart of a performance of it. So there's more tricks and stuff I'm sure I'm forgetting as well, because I've been doing it for like 20 years.